Hey guys, it's AxiomaticUncertainty here, and today we're going to be covering controllable thrust, right? So essentially the first tutorial was just us getting things set up, and obviously right now if I run it, we'll see that it just sort of flies away, but we want to be able to control the amount of thrust being exerted, so we want some say in the throttle. And so in order to do that, we're going to go into our drone controller, right? And as usual, we're just going to have to change a lot of stuff this tutorial, since this is just us getting started here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a public float, and we're going to call this calculate throttle, right? And this is going to take in a value, and in order to do that, we're just going to add, first off, another value. And we're going to make this our throttle val. And we're going to make this, float initialized to 0. And then in our throttle, we can add a new float. We can call this our TV for throttle value. And this is throwing an error because we just need to add a return statement. So we're just going to return 0f right now in order to kick that out. And then, right, so what we want to do is we want to change this by some amount. So actually, just going to add in another thing, which is going to be a public float, and it's going to be our sensitivity. And let's also make this one 0f. Actually, let's make this like 0.1, something like that, something low, because obviously, as I said, our drone is going to change quite a bit in terms of thrust, and minute differences can make a difference with something as light as this one. So what we're going to do is, we're going to start by just making some modifications to this and adding to this method. So we've stubbed it in. Now we need to actually write the code, and in order to do that, we need to first modify our throttle value, right? So we're going to add on something, and what we're going to do in order to add this is we're going to get an axis of input, right? And these axes can actually be found here. We can modify these and just access them from our project settings tab under the input category. And if we just let that load, we can go into our input manager and actually modify these values. So you can see this is the one for which we're looking. This has our W, A, S, and D keys as, our W, oops, let's remove that. It has our, actually, I'll just leave it on. It has our W, S, up and down keys. And what we can do with that is we can essentially just use that as our key for our throttle value changes. So when we add input to any of those keys, it will create a corresponding value. So down and S will create negative values, which will decrease our throttle value, and up and W will also change things. So I hope that makes sense. Now we're going to add that in. So we can just call this our vertical, right? And now we can do one more thing, which is obviously if I were to run this, and just, let's do this here. Calculate throttle. Oops. And then just say TV. Or sorry. Throttle val. And let's just say throttle val here. Sorry, I'm very tired. We can then actually define this and then just debug it in order to check it out, see how it's working. Right. And okay, so now we can just go in here and run it really quickly. And you can see if I just change this value, that's a little bit odd. Not sure why we're not getting any changes to it. adding some input, so I don't know what's going on there. I see. Okay, this is the problem. We're still returning 0f, so we need to return TV here instead. And so now if I run this, we should get some value. So you can see this thing increases without bound and also decreases without bound. And the problem with that, as you can probably tell based upon the emphasis of the previous sentences, is that there's no boundary here, right? We need to constrain this value such that we can't, create infinite thrust for this drone, and it's not gonna work. It's not realistic. It doesn't make any sense, yada yada. So in order to fix this, what we can do is we can just take this, right, and we can actually head into our throttle value. We can redefine it as mathf.clamp, right, and then we can say TV, right, let's say negative 2.5f and 5f. So those sound like good values, and actually I'm going to leave a little comment here. We're going to say animation curves, and I'm just going to get to that in another tutorial. Basically, we'll go over how we can use those in order to do some fine-tuning with the values here and whatnot. Anyhow, moving on. We now have our throttle value in full, and we have gotten that all set up. So what we need to do is just copy this first, and then come in here and just say void apply thrust, right? And what this will do is we can then, it'll allow us to take an input, so we can say float T for thrust, and we can say, we can just add this in here, right, and say T, and actually here's what we want to do. T1, actually, what we'll do is we'll say FR, float FR, float BL, float BR. And each of these will correspond to a given motor, so we can just call these FL, right, and FR, and BL, and then BR. And now we can just delete all these and say apply thrust, and let's just add in something here, and that something will be a value for each of these. In this case, all of them are going to be the same, so we're just going to say throttle valve, throttle valve, throttle valve, throttle valve. And the reason for my making these thrusts potentially different is obviously that drones' motors need to be different in some cases. And so, now that we have all this set up, we can actually just manage that, and handle different types, despite the fact that we don't need to yet. It's good to have it set up and, established so that when we do, we're ready. So now if I come into my drone, it shouldn't fly, right? So we're stagnant, and you can see that the second I start to add a little bit of input, we can actually get off the ground a little bit. And obviously there's some issues in that, like making any of these values negative, right, will pull the drone downward, and that's not really what we want. Basically, the issue with that is that our being able to pull the drone downward does not necessarily add anything apart from a bunch of issues, because like right now you may be saying, oh, that makes sense, we want to pull the drone downward, don't we? But we actually don't, and the reason for that is that our being able to pull the drone downward, one sec, will actually only cause issues when it comes to, realism, right? A real drone can't be pulled downward by anything apart from gravity in most cases. The drone's propellers are not made to rotate backwards. They only rotate in one direction or stop. And the way that you pull a drone down is by decreasing the rate at which the propellers are turning. So you have a gyroscope inside that's adjusting the speeds automatically in order to keep the drone both stable and, at the same height, right? And it maintains all of those things and keeps the drone from rotating, shifting, or anything like that, right? In our case, we're going to implement that later, but right now, obviously, it's creating negative force, which suggests that we're actually pulling the drone downward by rotating the propellers in the opposite direction, and we don't want that. But we'll deal with that later. So for now, I'm going to simply bid you adieu. I hope that you've enjoyed this, new little tutorial. Obviously, we didn't do much this time, but I'm just trying to get a lot of this stuff set up so that you guys are prepared for the more advanced stuff to which we're going to get later. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, please, if you enjoyed, remember to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, questions, just general comments, criticisms, etc., please remember to leave those in the comment section. Comment down below and give any of that information. Feel free to contact me through the comments. I do respond to everything that's given, and I try to do that within a day or so. And yeah, that's gonna be it. It's me signing off.